This podcast is brought to you by the good people at Living with Hemophilia, the online hemophilia community brought to you by Bayer. Living with Hemophilia is the destination of choice for a plethora of useful info, like medical and non-medical tips, helpful advice, information on programs for all ages and stages, leadership opportunities and initiatives, sewing patterns, and videos, the best videos. And because it's on the internet, it's easy to find. Simply type livingwithhemophilia.com into your search bar, and there you are. Thank you, Internet. Join Bayer's community of fellow hemophilia patients, caregivers, and advocates as we put the live in Living with Hemophilia. You can even like us on Facebook. That's even better because you can use emojis on our Facebook page and receive all our latest updates. So check out Living with Hemophilia. And before you wish happy birthday to that friend from 3rd grade or share a funny meme about cats and Mondays, head over to Facebook and like Bayer's Living with Hemophilia page. You'll be glad you did.
Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to another episode of Ask the Expert. I am your host, Amy Board, and today's episode is very near and dear to my heart. We're having a conversation today about board service. Many of us in our bleeding disorder community serve on board of directors or have been asked to serve, or maybe are thinking about serving. Not only is it an honor to serve on a board of directors, but it's a huge responsibility as well. I've asked former National Hemophilia Foundation board chair, Jorge de la Riva, to join us, and we're going to talk about the value board service can bring not only to your local and national organizations, but to you as well. But before we jump in, I just wanted to remind you to subscribe to our network of podcasts. If you haven't already, please check out the Bloodstream podcast. It's awesome, and it's hosted by Patrick and Natalie Lynch. And check out our newest series, the Empowering Women series. It's hosted by Heather Robb, and it's fantastic. It is a series of podcasts, a series of conversations with women in our community about advocating for yourself, about some of the disappointments and the discouragements that women in our community feel with diagnosis, with not being believed. So it's a wonderful, wonderful listen, and I believe several have been available already, and I think some more are on the way. So please check out the Empowering Women podcast wherever you listen to your pods. If you have any questions or thoughts for future podcasts for me personally, you can find me at Twitter. My Twitter handle is @Bordo87, or you can email us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. And before we go on, I just want to give a special thanks to Bayer Pharmaceuticals for sponsoring Ask the Expert. Without Bayer's support, conversations like the one I'm having today wouldn't happen, so we are so internally grateful for their support. So let's dive in, shall we? As I mentioned, today's topic is near and dear to my heart. I was the executive director of the Colorado chapter of the National Hemophilia Foundation for about 7 years. And one of the most rewarding aspects of that job was working with my board of directors. And I know that board service can seem extremely daunting, but I truly believe in the magic of it. In the world of nonprofits, board service is considered the highest volunteer position. And board of directors, in my opinion, are truly looked at as the stewards of the organization. They embody the community that they represent at that table. And they have a very special task of guiding the organization into the future. But it's a commitment. Board service is a commitment, and it should be a commitment. It should be taken very seriously. But I honestly believe that it's daunting. I feel like a lot of people have no idea what they're doing when they come to sit on a board. As myself, as a staff member, I was not deterred by that at all. In fact, I didn't need a lot of experience. I was looking specifically for people that had passion for the organization and that had connections to our local broader community that could hopefully bring the organization out in terms of awareness. But I think that the importance of board service should really truly be a conversation that we are having. So I've asked Jorge to join us today to share a little bit about his experience as a board member and as a chair. He was the chair of NHF's board for several years. And board service is such a strong aspect in our community, and building strong boards will help us build stronger organizations. So if you are currently serving on a board or thinking of serving in the future, hopefully this episode will be inspiring. So grab yourself a cup of coffee and let's have ourselves a conversation. I am your host, Amy Board, and welcome to episode 26, or our The Value of Board Service episode of the Ask the Expert podcast. I'm honored to be joined today by Jorge de la Riva. Jorge is the former board chair of the National Hemophilia, and he brings a wealth of expertise on the ins and outs of board service. Jorge, welcome to Ask the Expert.
Thank you for inviting me.
Jorge, today we're diving deep into the world of board service, and I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what got you interested in board service in the first place, and had you served on a board prior to NHF?
Well, some 20 years ago, we went to New York to an event for chapter leaders at NHF's headquarters. And at that time, we had a chance to meet with senior staff and board members. And I always remembered observing them and thinking how if anyone was going to have an effect on my son's life with hemophilia, it would be precisely that group of people. I never imagined that I one day would be board chair, but I always felt great respect and kinship for people who do that type of work. Years later, when I was first asked to run for a seat on the board, I felt very honored to play a small role in moving the mission forward. It was humbling then as it is now, and it has been a gift in my life. As far as my board experience prior to NHF, that was very limited to for-profit organizations. So serving on the board of a nonprofit organization has been a new experience for me.
So many of our community members are asked to sit on their local chapter boards, and I know your wife, Debbie, was an executive director of a local chapter for years. Can you share a little bit, just from your lens, about how important local board service is to an organization?
Well, you and I have spoken earlier, and I was sharing with you how an executive director has a crucial role within the community. It's a little bit like the mom or the dad in the community for matters that are related to bleeding disorders. Our chapters are very much the front lines of engagement with the community, with the HTCs, and with the community at large. Chapters are in constant direct contact with the community and provide support to all of us that only chapters can provide. They're also the line of communication between community members and the national organizations. They're the lifeblood of our community, and they can only survive and thrive if they can count with skilled, energetic, and enthusiastic volunteers at every level, but particularly at the chapter level. And looking at it from the other side of the table, as a community member participating in a board can give one an opportunity to shape the dialogue and to be there for others in the same way that others have been there earlier for us in our lives. The chapter is our bleeding disorders home, and as I've said before, it is and will always be what we make of it.
You know, Jorge, I mentioned in the intro to this podcast about how board service can be so daunting. When you first joined the board at NHF, did you have any idea of what would be expected of you? Did you go in having any idea, or was that kind of vague? I mean, what was it like stepping in?
Well, honestly, it was different than I thought, and at the beginning, it was very humbling. I looked around the table and I saw a group of 12 or 15 people, all of whom had more experience, higher educational level than I had, and it took a while for me to start feeling confident. And as always, when you join a new organization, best thing to do is to listen. So that was a learning experience for me. And one thing that was something to get used to was that at NHF we have a governance model, and while I have always believed in the importance of empowering a chief executive, it took a while for me to understand how that works in a nonprofit organization.
Can you explain a little bit about that governance model? What that looked like?
Yes. Within a governance model, a board of directors sets out the mission, defines a broad strategy and goals, sets boundaries and then enforces those boundaries and reviews that those boundaries are being respected. And it is up to the chief executive to select the tactics and the resources that are necessary to carry out those goals and to achieve the mission. It is critical that as that is happening, a board clearly aligns strategies and tactics and compensation to make sure that they flow together. What a governance board does not do is try to direct anybody in the organization other than the chief executive. What a board of directors does not do is get in the weeds as far as outlining specific functions and outlining specific items that need to be done. That is a difficult thing to get used to. And as part of that, it's critical that the board speaks with one voice. In a board as large as NHF's, and many of the chapters have this same issue, where there are 6 or 8 or 15 people like there are at NHF, it is absolutely normal and to be expected that there are as many opinions as there are individuals. But once the board makes a decision, votes on a particular item, any board member can only speak as to what the board has decided. Ideally through the board chair, but at any given time, board members are involved in different functions, like I am today. And if you were going to ask me about something specific about NHF, what I would say is what the board has voted on. I would speak for the board with the same voice as any other board member would.
When you were getting started, what was most helpful to you as you started to understand your role and your voice on the board? Were there any resources? Were there any relationships on the board that helped you kind of understand your role?
First and foremost, I tried to keep in mind that I was there to serve, to do something for others. I always remember something that Gandhi once said, that the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. At the beginning, it is always important to listen, and my family has been very blessed throughout the years. We have participated in so many of the community's events at NHF, at the chapter level with HFA. We've gone to Washington Days. We have experienced all the different opportunities that are offered to our community. And it's through those platforms that I learned from different people as to what the community's hopes and aspirations were. And I try to be a true representative of the community as I started working for the board.
Jorge, this is a broad question, but in your opinion, what do you think the role of a board member is to the organization, and how does that differ from the staff's role?
All right. So the board again is there to set a mission, work on the strategy together with staff, to define broad goals, to define boundaries, to make sure that the resources of the organization are sufficient to meet those boundaries, and particularly to provide leadership. To me, that's a very critical part of the role of a board member.
You mentioned multiple times define boundaries. Can you expand on that a little bit about what you mean?
There are many examples. For example, one of the boundaries is that an organization must be operated within the law. It's a very simple boundary, but that needs to be reviewed, and board members' fiduciary responsibilities that things are done in a legal way. Provide boundaries in terms of how to allocate and spend the organization's resources. Provide boundaries to define how far the power of the executive comes, and where does it stop. What kind of reports the executive needs to present and when, things like that.
You served as the board chair for the organization, or the board president, as some chapters call it. What was your transition like from a member at large to the chair, and how did your duties change?
That's interesting because there is quite a difference between serving as a board member and then serving as a board chair. However, it's easy to think of the board chair as, to use a simple word, as the boss, and that is
Yeah.
so far from being right.
Mm.
It's ridiculous. A board chair is there to serve other board members, is to serve the community, is to make sure that the board's will is executed, to communicate that with the chief executive, uh, so that in that regard the board chair does not speak for himself or herself, but rather they make sure that the will of the board is executed. A board chair also provides helps to shape the agenda, but it is the majority of the board that defines how things are to be done, and what the goals are. So that's it's important that is understood, as a director, and even more as a board chair. It is a position of service.
This is just nerding out a little bit. I was so personally drawn to you when you were serving as chair, and and I guess I didn't realize it as I wasn't privy to those conversations, but I think it is because of your embodiment of service. I mean, it really translated to the community and to your audience. And I think so many times we get so caught up in ourselves that we forget what we're really there for, and what that means, what the word service really means. And I loved the phrase, "the will of the board is executed." That is the number one task of the board chair, is that the will of the board is executed. And what interesting skills to have: service, and just the ability to project manage, really, just the goals and the idea and the vision of the people around that table. I think that's really fascinating.
Thank you.
In your experience, what is a good relationship, a working relationship between the board chair and the CEO or the executive director?
That's complicated sometimes
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
the nature of nonprofit boards is such that board members have short terms, and they come and go, whereas the executive director or the chief executive of a national organization is there before they are and will be there after they leave. And as such, it's easy to exchange the roles, and perceive the executive director or the CEO as the board's supervisor. And it takes some time for new board members to adjust to that. But as any other relationship, it is always a matter of following values, of having respect for each other, of having transparency, and acting in an honest way. If the board's directives are clearly set out, they're clearly communicated, that saves a significant amount of grief down the road.
How often did you all meet as a governing board for NHF?
We have 4 meetings a year minimum. Two of those are in person, and two of those are conference calls.
And do you at the national level have committees? Did you all have to sit on separate committees as well as the main governing board?
Absolutely. The board has the NHF's board has several committees. Development, we call it development, but it's really to recruit new board members. It has now recently changed to having a component of uh, fundraising and recruitment. Then there is a chapter relations committee, which is very important because um, board must be very close to the chapters as representatives of the community to hear what the concerns and the issues are out in an independent way than just listening to what staff has to say. There is an audit committee, there is a treasury committee, there is a CEO compensation committee, which is proved to be very important because that is how a board motivates the chief executive through compensation. And so that's an important committee. All the committees are important in their own way. I'm hoping that I'm not omitting any of them, but I probably am.
Have you checked out Living with Hemophilia yet? If you have, kudos to you. Not only are you eager to join the exciting community of discourse and helpful information, you're also a keen listener and patron of the arts. But if you haven't taken a swim through livingwithhemophilia.com, take a moment to pull it up on the ol' internet. I think you'll love it. Helpful content, relevant updates, and, most of all, a bunch of people going through the same things you are. It's a growing part of the online Living with Hemophilia community, brought together by the good people at Bayer. Also, put it on your Facebook to-do list. Hit the like button on the Living with Hemophilia Facebook page. It's a good alternative to looking at the slideshow of your neighbor's recent foot surgery. I mean, unless you're into that sort of thing. Living with Hemophilia from Bayer. Check it out.
You mentioned fundraising, and of course in the nonprofit space, we talk about fundraising quite a bit. I know this topic can be stressful and it might deter some people from joining a board, but can you share your thoughts about the importance specifically of board member fundraising and some of the conversations that you have been a part of in terms of fundraising for the health of the organization?
That is a topic in which no matter what we do at any chapter or at the national level, we will never do enough. Our resources are always more limited than our aspirations. For director to be a part of fundraising in a real way, it's very important for many reasons. One of them is because of leadership. Because how can an organization ask others to give where board members are not giving? Because when staff is writing out grants, many organizations look at what type of fundraising efforts are being done by board members. NHF has a minimum per year for every board member, and for some people that is a true sacrifice. We call it a give or get, which means that the board member can either give a certain amount of money per year, or they can fundraise through various other efforts. At the end of the day, it's always a give or give, and it's not easy to do, particularly if a person stays in the board for many years. It becomes a taxing duty, but nevertheless, it's part and parcel of service. It's just like when we go to church. We don't expect the church to function without resources, and the church depends on us to participate in that effort.
Did you guys have high-level conversations about fundraising, not only just in particular, individualized board giving, but fundraising efforts on a whole for the organization? I think a lot of local chapters are knee-deep in discussions right now about how to raise, money separate from industry. Did you guys have those conversations?
We certainly have. We think they're high level, by the way, but that may be only limited to our perception. but no, absolutely. It's a big concern in our community because of the tremendous amount of money that there is in our medication. We have been dependent on that much more than we should be. It is incumbent on every organization in the bleeding disorders community in the U.S. to look beyond itself for fundraising. That is one of the most important things that we can do. It's been high on our radar from the day I joined 9 or 10 years ago to today. My personal opinion is that we have not achieved anywhere near as much as what we set out to do, and that we have a long way to go at every level in our community.
For a community member thinking about joining a board, I'm sure that can seem very daunting. Like, how could I contribute? I don't have a huge, budget able to give the organization to float it. Why in the world should I serve? What is the importance of it? What would you say to that community member?
That brings to mind a little boy, Lalo. I don't remember his last name. He did fundraising for the walk in Houston. He's probably done it several years running, but I remember 4 or 5 years ago that came to my attention. And every year he would get together with his family, and I get emotional, and they would go wash cars to raise money. And that was so touching to me. And I always think that at the chapter level, at the national levels, at every level of our community, when we go spend money, we must always assume that the money we are spending is the money that Lalo raised washing cars. It may not be as many dollars as what we raise with some of our very generous corporate funders, but that is a responsibility and the duty of board members and of staff members at every one of our organizations. That is the money we spend.
Another aspect that we ask of board members that I know can be daunting, you mentioned before, is recruitment of other board members. It is a year-round activity that can easily be pushed back to the back burner. Our board was notorious for that. We would always get to September and be like, oh, we need to recruit. What was your experience like recruiting new board members? What was that like for you guys at the national level?
Well, through no effort of mine, I believe NHF has been very blessed with a very high level of board members during the last decade. But we are always aspirational. We always think that we can and must do better at chapter and at the national level. And we can only do that if we start with board members. I always think it's great when we have community members around the table in chapter boards, but it's even better if those community members have special special skills that they bring to the table. And it's even better when those are complemented by people who are not affected by bleeding disorders. I can tell you, for example, right now we are very blessed to have as board chair at NHF Brian Andrew, who is not affected by a bleeding disorder, and he gives so generously of his time and of his skills, and he complements and augments what we would not have been able to do without people like him.
Jorge, how important is it to have different opinions around the table and to have those differences voiced? I'm speaking from experience. Our board had a really big aha moment where we realized, oh, we all like each other and we all we tend to agree on everything, and that's not moving the organization forward. And it got real uncomfortable when we really started to have people push back, I think, in wonderful ways. In your opinion, how important is it to have different opinions and to have those opinions voiced?
That is no doubt critical. It comes with responsibilities. I've always observed how at any given meeting anywhere in the world, you have more than one person. If you have 5 or you have 10 or you have 20, you will have coming out of that meeting as many different opinions as people who participated in that meeting. So it's always important to review what all those different people decided to do together, so that then there is no confusion. But absolutely, part of my time with the NHF's board, we had board members who represented, for example, areas of the country where there are no HTCs, in Montana, in Wyoming, in North Dakota. That brought a perspective that many of us did not have, when we had representatives around the table of people who had PWD. Again, that brought a different perception. When we had people from the medical community, when we had people from all walks of life, can bring a different way of looking at things, and it is in the aggregate that that one can make better decisions and understand how priorities can be arrived at best.
Jorge, this is a nerd question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What, in your opinion, is the difference between a working board and a strategic board?
I believe that's a misnomer. I think in all boards, board members have two different hats. The hat as director, and then there's the other hat as volunteer. One works under the supervision of the executive and must follow that person's lead and the organizational policies and boundaries. As director, one works on mission, on vision, on values, and on broad strategic terms, directing the executive. It can be confusing because when you are part of a committee or you're volunteering to run an event or to raise funds, you if you're a volunteer, you must remember that you need to follow the directives that the chief executive through directly or through their staff give you. As a board member, you are to speak with one voice as the board and to define broad policies and strategies for the organization.
Going into another topic that is hot right now when it comes to chapter leadership and some of the board development that is happening across the country is strategic planning. And I know it's crucial to nonprofit organizations. And speaking from experience as well, I know many times our local chapters are just inundated with programming deadlines and they don't have enough staff or resources to allow the space for strategic planning. And so I was wondering if you could offer some word of advice or direction to folks who are maybe sitting on a board already about the value of strategic planning.
Strategic planning is paramount because in our community, as in any other community, or even in a business or in a family, we all would like everything to be perfect. Everything is a very broad term, and no organization or individual can take care of everything at the same time. It is because of that we must prioritize. We must select strategies where the work of the organization is going to have the best possible result, and weigh resources versus wants versus goals, and that is the beginning of forming a strategic program. I believe that that board members can be a great resource to board chapters. National board directors can be a great resource to board chapters in helping to achieve those things. I also know that the NHF has a lot of support for boards to work on strategic planning, and it is paramount that we become better at doing that.
Absolutely. And we will make sure that those resources are available on our program notes for this podcast. Jorge, this is just a personal anecdote, but one of my favorite memories of all of my NHF annual meetings, which is now the Bleeding Disorder Conference, was when you would stand up and speak at the opening session, and you would introduce the CEO, you would introduce Val Bias, and I was always impressed that you, a volunteer, could speak so well to the vision of the organization. And so from your angle, what do you think is so valuable about having a board member in particular speak to the community?
That may have been my favorite role while I was at the board, to have the immense privilege and honor to speak to the community. I will give you one particular segment of that. I have always said that what we are, what we make of it. I always thought that the organization that at every single level should demand of itself and others that we work towards a cure. And I have spoken about the hope for that cure, about the hope for better treatments and cures for our community for many years, as have many, many others. And nobody will ever be able to convince me that what is happening today, this spring of new therapies that is now being showered upon our community, is not happening because those things were talked about. And that is why I always try to encourage our community to demand better of itself and others. If we don't ask for it, we don't get it. The first step towards achieving any goal is to define it.
That's really such a lofty vision for this community. It's beautiful, and it's so important. And I think just working with my own board, sometimes it is very hard for a group of people to see that far into the future of what the vision of this community really could look like. What went into creating that vision as a group, as you guys sat around and discussed about what was the one thing that you guys were going towards? What went into that?
Well, the easiest answer is that we took a look at the mission of NHF as it is stated, to come up with better treatments and cures for bleeding disorders, and to provide resources for the community through education, research. At the beginning of every board meeting, I would read our mission, and I would call for the board to focus on that mission. Remembering that mission again and again and again and again, it's easy to go towards the vision. Now, the longer answer to that is that we did an enormous amount of work, meeting after meeting after meeting, to come up with a vision for NHF. We brought in a facilitator. We had people come and speak to the board. We talked to community. We talked to HTCs. We talked to MASEC. And at the end of the day, the vision that we had is that one day there would be cures for all bleeding disorders. That is our vision. And God willing, our community has taken gigantic steps towards that goal in the last 20 years. I read again and again and again, written by a variety of people, how amazing it is to be standing in this community today, looking at how things have evolved over the last 5 or 10 years. It's really a thing of beauty.
Jorge, can you share how board service enriched your own life?
Oh my goodness, so many ways. To begin with, I have met so many amazing people. First at the board, then at staff, and then as I've had the opportunity to travel and speak to people at the walks and at the national meetings and at the world meeting, and I've heard stories of people that have done things that touch me in ways I cannot begin to say, like those people who go and adopt children with hemophilia from China or from far off places, and people that spend their lives improving the future of our community. It has been the most inspiring work of my life.
To close, Jorge, in your opinion, why do you think folks should serve on a board of directors?
First, from a selfish standpoint, because it will give them the best education that for themselves or for their family members, because they will help shape the dialogue and the priorities, and because we owe it to all those people on whose shoulders we stand today, that we must do for future generations what has been done for others before.
I love that answer. Oh my goodness. I wish I had that back in the day when I was recruiting board members. Thank you again, Jorge, for joining us today and for sharing your experiences. I know our communities can continue to grow with strong and healthy boards, and we so appreciate your service to our community. And thank you for this conversation, because I think it's a really lovely thing that we have in this community, is we have a strong chapter network with strong board of directors. So thank you so much for your contribution.
It is I who thank you for this opportunity, and also for the great work you do in informing and educating our community through this series of podcasts.
Oh, thank you, Jorge. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, if you have interest in serving on a board locally or nationally, the best thing to do is to reach out to the organization and see if there are any openings. Volunteering for an event or sitting on a committee is a great way to get to know the organization before you make that commitment to serve on the board. And remember, board service commitment goes both ways. It is a decision for both the organization and for you. So if you feel like you can't give the full commitment, that is okay. Board service is most rewarding when you have the time and energy to give. A great resource to check out if you are currently serving on a board or if you're considering board service is BoardSource. Check it out at boardsource.org. They have tons of resources. They have great trainings. They have great resources and documents that you guys can read, and they have a fantastic book, kind of a 101 on what it's like to serve on a board. So make sure to check that out. And that is all for episode 26 of the Ask the Expert podcast. We'll be back next month with another expert interview.
Have you checked out Living with Hemophilia yet? If you have, kudos to you. Not only are you eager to join the exciting community of discourse and helpful information, you're also a keen listener and patron of the arts. But if you haven't taken a swim through livingwithhemophilia.com, take a moment to pull it up on the ol' internet. I think you'll love it. Helpful content, relevant updates, and, most of all, a bunch of people going through the same things you are. It's a growing part of the online Living with Hemophilia community, brought together by the good people at Bayer. Also, put it on your Facebook to-do list. Hit the like button on the Living with Hemophilia Facebook page. It's a good alternative to looking at the slideshow of your neighbor's recent foot surgery. I mean, unless you're into that sort of thing. Living with Hemophilia from Bayer. Check it out.
BloodstreamMedia.com is your one-stop shop for all of Bloodstream Media's podcasts for the bleeding disorder community.
Once on BloodstreamMedia.com, don't forget to follow the links to subscribe to the Bloodstream podcast, Ask the Expert podcast, the Powering Through podcast, and the Bloodline podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Have an idea for a future episode of Ask the Expert? Have a question that you would like to hear an expert answer?
Email us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. You'll also find Bloodstream Media on facebook.com/bloodstreammedia and on Twitter @bloodstreaminfo.
This episode of Ask the Expert was written by Amy Board.
Produced by Patrick James Lynch.
Rob Bradford.
Joshua Sterling Bragg.
Avra Friedman.
And Colby Crow. Artwork by Katie Wright Mead.
And Ryan Geelan.
And the Ask the Expert podcast is edited by Allison Stoney.
I'm your host, Amy Board, and until next time, embrace that mystery and fear of life. You are not alone.